The Galactic Council chamber was more than a room. It was a world of its own, hanging like a crystal orb in the heart of the Citadel star station, with its high ceilings that shimmered like the surface of a distant nebula and walls made of living glass that pulsed softly with the energy of 1,000 minds in debate. Representatives from over 200 civilizations sat in their places, each one unique in shape, color, and voice, yet all united under one purpose: to maintain order and peace in a galaxy that had known too many wars. As the murmur of conversation settled, the central platform lit up, and all eyes turned to the small figure standing in the light. She was human, tall by council standards, but fragile-looking, with calm gray eyes and a diplomatic robe that moved like liquid metal with her every step. Ambassador Elena Cross of Earth stood alone at the center, her voice soft but steady as she began to speak. "Honored members of the council," she said, her words echoing across the chamber, translated instantly into hundreds of languages. "We come not in strength, but in fear." A quiet fell over the chamber. Fear? From humans? That word was not expected. The Tarshek delegation blinked their many eyes in confusion. The Zoriths twisted their silver tendrils nervously. Most had only ever seen humans in data reports advancing faster than any species had in recorded history, conquering space with alarming speed, building technology that rivaled ancient empires, and yet here she was, speaking of fear. Elena continued, and her voice trembled just slightly, not from weakness, but from the weight of what she carried. "Our history is painted in blood," she said. "We fought each other for thousands of years. We've ended millions of lives in our own wars. We fear war, not because we are weak, but because we know exactly what it turns us into." There was no sound in the chamber now. Only the soft hum of the translation systems and the quiet breathing of hundreds of alien beings. Elena looked up, meeting the eyes of every representative who would look back. "We are cautious because we have learned. Our ancestors left behind ruins and regrets. We do not wish to repeat them." At that moment, many in the council began to relax. Some nodded. The Ilarian high singer let out a soft trill of agreement. It seemed humanity, for all its fast rise and unknown potential, understood the importance of peace. A few even smiled. But others did not. From the darker sections of the chamber, subtle glances passed between factions. The Jackal Confederacy sat silently, their bone-armored representative curling a clawed hand under his chin. "Weakness," he thought. "These humans speak like prey." Nearby, the Char Dominion watched with cold, unblinking eyes. To them, fear was always a tool, useful for control, dangerous when shown. Elena stepped back from the podium and gave a respectful bow. "We will listen. We will wait. And we will always choose peace first." With that, the platform dimmed, and she walked away, her figure small once more among the titans of the stars. As she passed by the aisles, she caught fragments of whispers, some respectful, some mocking. But she didn't pause. She had said what she came to say. Back in her private quarters aboard the Earth Embassy ship Unity, she sat alone with a cup of tea, staring out at the black of space beyond the window. Her aide, a young man named Rafik, entered quietly. "They didn't laugh," he said. Elena smiled faintly. "No. But they didn't all believe either." Rafik nodded. "Do you think the Jackals will make a move?" She didn't answer for a moment. Then slowly, she said, "They might. And they will regret it if they do." Far from the Council, in the shadowy lanes of unclaimed systems, the Jackal Confederacy had already begun to move. They saw in humanity a contradiction, technological power wrapped in soft words. To them, that was an invitation. They had destroyed older races before. Why not another? In a dusty hangar on the edge of known space, warships powered up, sleek and cruel, ready to jump toward the outer edges of human territory. They expected resistance, but the kind they were used to: panic, retreat, confusion. They didn't know what waited beyond the silence. Back at the Citadel, word of human fear spread like wildfire. It became a headline across the galactic net, repeated in every corner of the known stars. Humans claim fear of war. Some took it as a gesture of peace, others as a sign of cowardice. But in quiet corners, A few old veterans from ancient wars remembered stories of Earth's final global conflict, of AI gone rogue and then rebuilt to serve, of battles fought in silence across the stars in forgotten colonies. And they wondered not what humans feared, but what had made them so desperate to avoid war in the first place. On Earth, in a secure vault deep beneath Geneva, something stirred. Not a weapon, not yet. Just a system checking itself, one that hadn't been called in years. A gentle voice echoed inside the chamber, threat monitoring active. Defensive silence protocol ready. Elena, still staring into space, whispered to no one, "Let them test us." And somewhere, light years away, the first Jackal ship entered human space unseen but not unnoticed. The humans were afraid of war, yes? But fear does not always mean weakness. Sometimes it means preparation. The silence in the council chamber hung like a thick mist in the days following Ambassador Elena Cross's speech. While many had believed her words and accepted the idea that humanity feared war because of their past, a darker force was already stirring. Far from the polished walls of the Citadel, in the deepest reaches of unclaimed space, the Jackal Confederacy was preparing for something far less diplomatic. The Jackals were a cruel nomadic faction known for their ruthless raids and savage tactics. Their ships were ugly, built for speed and destruction rather than beauty or grace. They didn't believe in diplomacy, and they didn't believe in fear, at least, not fear of the kind humans spoke of. They saw opportunity in it. The Jackal leader, Gormak the Red, stood before a massive holographic map of human territories. His sharp eyes glinted with cold ambition. They fear us. It's clear. They think their words can protect them, but nothing protects the weak from the strong. We will make them understand. His clawed fingers swept across the map, selecting a small outpost at the edge of human-controlled space, a place called Cygnus Reach. It was one of the most isolated outposts, sparsely defended. The perfect target. Gormak's fleet was already on the move, its engines roaring to life as they jumped into hyperspace. Their route a well-calculated line of destruction. They would hit fast, hit hard, and leave nothing behind but fire and fear. Back on Earth, in the quiet halls of the human embassy, Elena sat at her desk, reviewing reports. She had expected something like this. The Jackals had been a problem for years, an irritation at the edges of galactic peace. But now, they were a threat. She leaned back in her chair, fingers pressed to her temples. Earth was prepared for war, but she had hoped it wouldn't come to this. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sharp chime on her desk console. A message came through, coded in urgency. It was from one of the distant outposts. The message was short but clear. Jackal fleet in Cygnus Reach. We are under attack. Elena's heart sank. She knew the Jackals wouldn't hesitate, but this was faster than expected. She immediately sent word to the military command to prepare the fleet. But in the back of her mind, she knew this wasn't going to be a simple fight. The Jackals didn't follow the rules. They didn't play by the same codes of honor or diplomacy that humanity had built its fragile peace on. The reports started flooding in from the outpost. The first wave of Jackal ships arrived without warning, swarming the station like locusts. The outpost's defensive systems were already overwhelmed by the sheer numbers of the enemy. The Jackal ships fired relentlessly, reducing the station's shields to nothing in seconds. There were no negotiations, no demands, just destruction. The humans at Cygnus Reach fought back with everything they had. They launched a counterattack, small as it was, with every fighter they could scramble into the air. But it was hopeless. The Jackals weren't interested in a fair fight. They were interested in total annihilation. As the battle raged, Elena remained calm, trying to keep a clear head. She had expected this. She knew the Jackals would test humanity's resolve. But it wasn't just about the outpost anymore. It was about the message. Earth couldn't let the galaxy believe they were weak, couldn't let the Jackals think they could simply destroy whatever they pleased. "Prepare the fleet," Elena said firmly to the officer beside her, her voice unwavering. "We're not letting this stand." But the next few moments were not what anyone expected. The Jackals, with their crude tactics and wild fighting style, were about to learn something they hadn't counted on. In the darkness of space, above Cygnus Reach, the silence was broken by a sudden, sharp, and eerie hum. The silent choir, as it was called by those who feared it, emerged from the shadows of the system. A fleet of sleek, black-hulled ships, their designs unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Their edges were sharp, like knives cutting through the dark. The ships moved without the roar of engines or the usual thrum of energy fields. They were silent, almost invisible. The jackals noticed them too late. Gormak, the Red, snarled as his sensors suddenly registered something wrong. His fleet had expected a typical response from humanity, a small defensive force they could easily crush. Instead, they were faced with something else, something terrifying. A wave of strange energy washed over their fleet, scrambling communications and disrupting their weapon systems. The jackal ships tried to maneuver, but the silent choir was already closing in, its ships moving like shadows, silent and deadly. Without warning, a sudden burst of energy ripped through the darkness, and the first of the jackal warships was torn apart. Not by missiles, not by lasers, but by gravity itself. The human ships, using technology that was far beyond anything the jackals had ever encountered, manipulated the very fabric of space around them. They didn't just fight, they warped the very battlefield. In moments, the jackals were caught in a trap. The silent choir moved with terrifying precision, dismantling their fleet in less than 10 minutes. There were no broadcasts of desperation, no final screams. Just destruction and then silence. Gormak, the Red's flagship, was among the last to fall, his fleet reduced to floating debris in the cold void of space. His final thoughts were not of rage, but confusion. How? How had the humans managed this? The jackals, who had once been the hunters, now found themselves prey. As the last of the jackal ships drifted away, consumed by the eerie silence of the human assault, the message was clear. Humans weren't just weak because they feared war. They were dangerous because they feared it and because they had prepared for it. Back in the council chamber, the news of the attack spread like wildfire. The jackals were known for their brutality, but now they had been defeated with such efficiency, such cold precision, that even the most hardened warlords were left speechless. Elena Cross stood once again before the council, her expression calm, but her voice firm. "We warned you," she said quietly. "We asked for peace. But when peace is threatened, we do not turn away. We fight. And we win." The delegates were silent, unsure of how to respond. They had seen the power of humanity's military might before, but this was something different. This was not just a show of strength. It was a statement, one that would echo across the galaxy for years to come. The jackals had been a test, and humans had passed it with terrifying efficiency. It was only the beginning. The galaxy had always been a place of conflict and uncertainty, but after the shocking defeat of the Jackal Confederacy, something had changed. A new, unsettling energy swept across the council. Whispers filled the halls of the Citadel, as representatives from different species murmured to one another in hushed tones. No one had expected humanity to strike so decisively, so swiftly. The jackals were known for their brutality, their ability to overwhelm weaker species with sheer force, and yet, in a matter of minutes, they had been wiped from the stars. The silence that followed the battle was not one of peace, but of something far more unnerving, a realization that the human race might not be as harmless as once believed. In the dark corners of the galaxy, where the light of civilization barely reached, ancient powers began to stir. The Ivath Dominion, a war-hardened empire that had conquered dozens of star systems, had watched the destruction of the Jackal fleet from afar. Their cold, calculating minds analyzed the attack, and they did not see weakness in the humans' actions. They saw a challenge. The Evath had long believed themselves to be the true rulers of the galaxy, their empire built on a foundation of fear and unyielding strength. But now, they had encountered something different. The humans did not cower. They did not run. They fought, and they won. And that, to the Evath, was a problem. The Evath were not a race to be ignored. Their military was vast, their fleets massive, and their tactics were brutal. They had crushed species far older and far more powerful than humanity, leaving nothing behind but burning worlds and broken dreams. But the more they thought about the humans, the more they began to sense a deeper danger, one they couldn't yet see. The humans had struck fast, silent, and precise. They hadn't just used weapons, they had used strategy. The Evath, with all their might, could not afford to underestimate the humans. They decided it was time to test them, to show the Council and the galaxy who truly ruled the stars. The Evath set their sights on the human colony of New Thessaly, a thriving world at the edge of human space. New Thessaly was rich in resources, a symbol of humanity's rapid expansion and progress. The Evath saw an opportunity. They would send their planet Cracker, a massive dreadnought capable of reducing entire planets to rubble, to destroy New Thessaly. It would be a show of strength, a warning to all who dared to think they could challenge the Evath. The Council had no idea of the threat that was coming, but Elena Cross knew the galaxy all too well. She had seen the signs, the subtle shifts in the power structure. She had felt the tension in the air. The Evath were moving. She called an emergency meeting. As soon as the council session began, Elena stood, her expression as calm as ever, but her eyes were sharp with purpose. "The jackals were not the end of this," she said, her voice carrying through the room. "We've seen the beginning of something else. The Evath Dominion is on the move. And if we do not act, they will destroy everything we've worked for." The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling over them. The council had heard of the Evath, of their reputation as a merciless empire, but they had never truly faced them. The Evath were a threat on a scale none of them could fully comprehend. A murmur of disbelief rippled through the assembly. A few raised their hands to object, to dismiss the idea as paranoia. But Elena's warning was not one to be taken lightly. She had faced the worst humanity had to offer and had seen the same in others. She understood the cold logic of power. And she knew that if the Evath were allowed to strike first, they wouldn't stop until the entire galaxy had been subdued. As Elena spoke, she felt the familiar weight of responsibility on her shoulders. Humanity was at the crossroads of survival, and she had to make them understand. This was not just another skirmish. This was a fight for their future. The council debated fiercely for hours, torn between their fear of the Evath and their reluctance to escalate the situation. But Elena's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "If we wait, we lose. And I do not intend to lose." Her words held a simple truth. The Evath did not fight for peace. They fought to dominate. Humanity had already demonstrated that they would not back down, but could they stand against the full might of an empire that knew no mercy? The answer, Elena believed, was yes. But they had to act quickly. The council, though reluctant, eventually agreed to her plan. They would send a fleet to New Thessaly, but it would not be enough. The Evath were coming with overwhelming force, and the human fleet, though strong, could not stand alone. Elena turned to the allies they had made in the past, those species who had seen the value of human diplomacy and had come to respect their resolve. It was time to unite the galaxy's disparate forces into a single front. As the Council began to finalize the defense of New Thessaly, Elena received another report from Earth's military command. The Evath had already launched their planet Cracker. The monstrous ship was heading toward New Thessaly at unimaginable speeds, its weapons already charging. There was no time to wait. Earth's fleet, reinforced by ships from the Phalari and the Zoriths, would have to intercept the Evath dreadnought before it could reach the planet. The race to New Thessaly was on. The tension was thick in the air as humanity's fleet entered the system, its ships moving in tight formation, ready for what would surely be a battle unlike any the galaxy had seen before. Elena stood on the command deck of the Unity, watching the stars blur past as they made the jump into the system. She had no illusions about the fight ahead. The Evath were an unstoppable force, and their dreadnought would level New Thessaly in a heartbeat if they weren't stopped. But she also knew something the Evath didn't. Humanity was not afraid of war. They had learned from it. They had seen its horrors and its costs, and they would fight with everything they had, not just for survival, but for the future. As the first of the Evath ships came into view, Elena's voice was steady, unwavering. "Prepare for battle," she ordered. And remember, we're fighting for every future, every hope, and every life. The human fleet surged forward, its engines blazing bright, ready to face the storm that was coming. But what the Evath did not realize, what no one realized yet, was that the true test of humanity's resolve had only just begun. In the deep void of space, where the stars themselves seemed to tremble, the battle for New Thessaly would be the spark that ignited a fire that could either save the galaxy or destroy it forever. The human fleet, a mixture of sleek warships and older reinforced vessels, surged through space toward New Thessaly with unparalleled determination. Elena Cross stood at the helm, her eyes fixed on the vast emptiness of the stars, but her mind was focused entirely on the battle ahead. The Evath were coming fast, relentless, and ready to obliterate everything in their path. She had no illusion about the outcome. The Evath's planet cracker was a weapon of unimaginable power, capable of erasing an entire world in a single strike. New Thessaly was in the line of fire. But there was something else beneath the surface of Elena's resolve, a deep, unspoken fear. Fear not for the lives of the people of New Thessaly alone, but for something far greater, a line humanity had sworn never to cross. The Evath fleet came into view, an imposing sight, their dreadnought a dark, monstrous silhouette against the distant stars. It was like a shadow, vast and heavy, creeping forward with the weight of inevitability. But it wasn't just the size of the ship that unsettled Elena. It was the cold calculation in its movements, the way it glided effortlessly toward its target. The Evath knew no mercy. They weren't here for negotiations. They weren't here for anything but destruction. Their plan was simple: obliterate New Thessaly, and send a message to the galaxy humanity was not to be trifled with. But Elena knew the galaxy far too well. A message like that could have far-reaching consequences. If humanity allowed the Evath to destroy a peaceful world without retaliation, the consequences would echo across the stars, far beyond just New Thessaly. Elena's thoughts raced as she watched the countdown in the corner of her console. She knew the Evath would strike soon, and that their chances of surviving this confrontation were slim. Despite their impressive alliances, the human fleet was outnumbered, and even the most advanced ships in the fleet would struggle against the sheer might of the Evath war machines. As the first salvo of fire was launched by the Evath dreadnought, Elena felt a chill run down her spine. The battle had begun. There was no turning back now. The explosions lit up the dark expanse of space, violent bursts of light and shockwaves tearing through the void. The human ships responded, their weapons firing in a barrage of bright energy. The battle was like nothing any of them had ever experienced. The Evath ships were massive and their weapons devastating, but humanity fought with a fierce, unrelenting determination that made every hit count. The humans had been trained for this. They had fought against impossible odds before, and they were ready to face whatever came their way. The Evath fleet, however, showed no signs of slowing down. As the battle raged on, Elena gave orders to adjust their strategy. Their goal wasn't just to fight back, it was to stop the planet cracker. But as the Evath dreadnought fired another devastating blast toward New Thessaly, Elena made a decision that would forever change the course of this conflict. The line they had sworn never to cross, the line that separated humanity from the cold, merciless ways of the galaxy's conquerors, was fast approaching. She knew that if they allowed the Evath to use the planet cracker, humanity would lose everything. It would be a message to the galaxy that they were weak, that they could be crushed just like any other species. Elena glanced at her tactical officer, his face pale, sweat beading on his forehead as he worked furiously to keep the fleet in formation. "Do it," she said, her voice hard. "We can't let them finish this." The officer hesitated for a moment before nodding, understanding the gravity of her command. The moment he activated the override, the human fleet shifted into position. Elena knew what it meant: the counterstrike. It was a desperate gamble, one that would push their technology to its very limits. The risk was enormous. If they failed, it would mean the destruction of everything. But there was no choice. The line had been crossed. The counterstrike was humanity's final option. As the Evath dreadnought fired again, the Unity, along with the rest of the fleet, moved forward, positioning themselves between New Thessaly and the deadly weapon. Elena watched the space in front of her, every second stretched like an eternity. Then, in one explosive moment, the human fleet unleashed the full power of their newly developed experimental weapon, an energy field that could bend space itself. The weapon pulsed once, then surged outward in a burst of force that rippled through the fabric of space. The Evath dreadnought, unaware of the danger until it was too late, tried to evade, but the field enveloped it, warping the surrounding space. The dreadnought was caught in an unyielding gravitational pull, its massive engines struggling futilely against the force. In seconds, the ship's entire structure was torn apart, not by fire or explosions, but by the very fabric of space itself, ripped and twisted by the human technology. It was a sight that no one could have prepared for the Evath dreadnought, once a symbol of unstoppable power, now a broken husk drifting helplessly in the void. The remaining Evath fleet began to retreat, but the damage had been done. The battle was over. But Elena could hardly feel victorious. As the Evath ships fled into the darkness, she looked at the shattered remains of their once mighty flagship and realized that this was the line they had crossed. Humanity had used a weapon of unimaginable power, one that could destroy entire fleets, to stop the Evath. And in doing so, they had taken the first step towards something they could never return from. The galaxy would never see them the same way again. The line had been crossed, and the cost of victory was something no one could yet understand. Back aboard the Unity, Elena stood in the silence of the command deck, her face hard with resolve. "We've won," she said softly, though the words felt hollow. But at what cost? The officers around her remained silent, knowing that the war was far from over. The Evath might have been stopped for now, but there would be consequences, political, military, and moral, that would ripple across the galaxy for generations. Elena's mind was already racing, preparing for what would come next. Because she knew this, the galaxy would never again look at humanity the same way. And the next challenge would be far more dangerous than anything they had faced before. The victory over the Evath Dominion had been decisive, a blow that echoed through the stars. The destruction of the Evath dreadnought, the moment humanity unleashed its new weapon and bent space itself, had left the galaxy in stunned silence. The human fleet had barely escaped the battle unscathed, but the cost of such power was now weighing heavily on Elena Cross. As she sat in her command chair aboard the Unity, the enormity of what had been achieved settled in like a cold weight on her chest. The Evath, a dominant force in the galaxy for centuries, had been humbled. But Elena knew that the victory came at a price. The galaxy was watching. Humanity had crossed the line, and now the question was, what would they do next? The immediate aftermath of the battle had been chaotic. News of the human victory spread across the galaxy, and most of the galaxy's powers stood in awe of the force humanity had just demonstrated. But there were others, those who saw it as a threat, an indication that humanity was no longer a species to be ignored. The Council had been quick to send messages of congratulations and relief, but Elena knew that their true feelings were mixed. Many were uncomfortable with the power humanity had displayed, and they were right to be uneasy. Humanity had used a weapon that could alter the very fabric of the universe. It wasn't just the Evath they could defeat now, it was any species. The truth, unspoken but clear, was that humanity had become a superpower in the galaxy, and no one knew if they could control that kind of power. Elena had seen the shifts in the Council. Some were pushing for a more aggressive stance, suggesting that humanity take this newfound position of strength and expand their influence, using force when necessary to maintain control. Others were deeply unsettled, fearful that the same weapon they'd used to destroy the Evath dreadnought could one day be turned against them. As the Unity made its way back toward Earth, Elena felt the tension that gripped her. The ship's crew, once jubilant and proud of their victory, had grown quieter, their faces set with uncertainty. They had done what needed to be done, but now that the immediate threat was over, the true challenge began: maintaining peace. What kind of peace would there be after such a victory? And more importantly, how would humanity be seen by the rest of the galaxy? Elena was lost in thought when the comms officer called out to her. "Admiral Cross, we have a message from the Council." Elena's heart sank. She knew what this would be: a response to humanity's actions. She stood and walked to the communications station, where a hologram flickered to life, revealing the stern face of Counselor Elric from the Ixara Dominion. His eyes narrowed as he spoke, his tone cold and measured. "Admiral Cross, we acknowledge humanity's victory over the Evath. Your fleet's bravery is unquestioned. But this new weapon you've used is cause for concern." Elena braced herself for the inevitable. "The Council believes that humanity has crossed a dangerous line. There must be accountability for such power. You cannot claim victory and expect to be trusted with that kind of force. We need assurances that this weapon will never be used again." The weight of his words hit Elena like a physical blow. The weapon they had used, her mind had been focused on the immediate threat, the survival of New Thessaly, the defeat of the Evath, but now, the reality of what they had done was clear. Humanity had used a weapon that could reshape the entire balance of power in the galaxy. And the Council was demanding that they give it up. She stood in silence for a moment, struggling to find the right words. How could she explain that their victory hadn't been about power? It had been about survival. But Elena knew that her words wouldn't change the minds of the Council. They were right to be afraid. The real question was whether humanity could prove they were worthy of the trust they had just earned. After a long pause, Elena spoke. "Counselor Elric, humanity is not seeking conquest. We used this weapon to stop the Evath, to protect our people. We never wanted to cross this line, but we did what was necessary." Her voice was steady, but inside, she felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her. "We understand the fear we've caused, but we are not a threat. We are asking for the chance to prove that." The hologram flickered as Elric considered her words. "Words mean little when actions speak louder," he replied coldly. "You've proven what you're capable of. Now, you must prove that you can control it. Until then, the Council will be watching you closely." The transmission cut off, leaving Elena staring at the empty comms console. The Council was watching. The galaxy was watching. And she wasn't sure who feared them more, their enemies or their allies. The days that followed were filled with a mixture of celebration and tension. Earth was hailed as a hero for its role in stopping the Evath, but that victory came with expectations that would be difficult to meet. The Council demanded that humanity submit to a new set of regulations. The experimental weapon, capable of altering space, was to be locked away, its use restricted and heavily monitored. Elena and her team were tasked with ensuring that this weapon, this harbinger of power, was never used again. But the problem, Elena realized, wasn't just the weapon. It was what it represented. Humanity had shown that they could take the galaxy's worst threats head-on and win. But could they maintain peace with that kind of power? The question loomed larger every day. On Earth, leaders debated how to move forward. Some advocated for disarmament, seeking to prove humanity's commitment to peace. Others argued that they had earned the right to keep their power, to wield it when needed. But Elena knew that power was a dangerous thing. The true test of humanity's future would not be in their ability to win battles. It would be in their ability to maintain peace in a galaxy that was no longer sure what peace meant. As the days passed, Elena began to understand the weight of her role. She wasn't just an admiral anymore. She was a symbol of humanity's strength, but also of its potential downfall. The galaxy was watching, waiting to see whether humanity could wield its power without succumbing to the darkness that so many other civilizations had fallen prey to. It was a question that would haunt her for the rest of her life. And she knew that the answer, whatever it would be, would shape the future of the galaxy. But for now, there was one thing she was sure of: peace, like power, came with a price. And humanity was about to learn what that price truly was.